With PTNs. Don will show you how he ties a PTN Kiwi style.
This fly is a tungsten beadhead pheasant tail nymph. It's a variation of Frank Sawyer's pheasant tail, which was introduced to us by Dean Bell, our guide in the second week in New Zealand. He uses a tungsten bead to add some weight to the front of the fly in order to get it down in fast water and present it at the level the trout are feeding at. What I'm tying in here is a copper wire rib, the idea being that when we've tied the fly we'll wind this rib forwards, which will reinforce the fly and add a little bit of fish attracting flash to it. The tail of the fly is composed of some fibres from a cock hackle feather, and it gives a rather light tail. The conventional pheasant tail nymph has really got quite a dense tail on it. And we want a tail that's probably about 60% the length of the hook shank. So we'll catch that in on top and spiral the thread forward. Cut the excess away. And then holding tight onto there, wind back down to the bend of the fly. Touching turns of thread to produce a smooth body. When we wind the body material back over it, we don't get any lumps. The body of this will be made from some feather fibres from the centre tail of a cock pheasant. It's a durable material, but ribbing it with the copper wire will certainly help make the fly last a little bit longer and probably enable us to catch more than one fish using it. Tie this material in by the thin tip ends. And remove the excess. Take the thread back down to the bend of the hook, binding the material down. And then return up to the front. I'm going to wind the cock pheasant fibres around the hook to form the body. As I do so, the very fine little fibres stand out and offer a sort of fuzziness around the fly, which when it's silhouetted against the surface will give hopefully some impression of life. Lots of these nymphs have little gills which are quite active, sort of flutter while the thing's swimming. And so by using a fuzzy material to do this, we hopefully achieve that impression of life. Cut away the excess. And then when we rib the fly with the copper wire, we're going to wind it in the opposite direction to the way that we put the body material on. The idea being that these turns will overlap and lock down the body material. And so if the trout's teeth cut at the surface of the fly, and hopefully it won't release all the material on the first fish. Even spaced turns wound up to the front and again tied in with our thread. There's no need to cut this wire material away. If you just twist it and worry at it, it'll actually break off and it doesn't leave you any sharp tag ends. Secure that down, and the thorax of the fly is going to be a dubbed thorax made from some fur from a fox squirrel pelt. This material has got some really nice spiky speckled guard hairs in, and there's lots of these nymphs have little speckly legs. Dubbing the thorax with this material will really sort of allow a few fibres to stick out and hopefully work in the current and again provide that impression of a living item rather than a sort of dead rigid nymph. Dub that onto the fly, slide it up to the body, and then proceed to build up the thorax of the fly by winding turns of that dubbing material into place. You can see there how the fibres stand out. They're going to move and vibrate in the water and give some impression of life. Finish the fly with a whip finish just behind that tungsten bead head. Cut off the thread. And your tungsten beadhead pheasant tail is complete. As you can see, as I rotate the fly, there's a lot of loose fibres of material sticking out there. You could even rough this dubbing up slightly if you wished, to basically give a sort of 360-degree effect of loose fibres. But you just need enough to actually vibrate and give the impression of some legs on a living insect. And so, of course, now all that remains is to squash down the barb on the fly in order to make releasing the trout a very simple and easy matter.
Here are examples of other successful flies we used to catch these magnificent fish. Starting with the deep caddis pupa. This is a heavily weighted pattern to get right down to them, made from light green polydubbing with a copper mylar flashback. Legs and tails are partridge. This fly took the biggest fish of the trip from a deep, fast drop-off. It was definitely the fly for the job and a shrewd selection by the guide. The iris caddis is an emergent caddis pattern from Craig Matthews. In our opinion, one of the best emergent caddis patterns around. Note the use of a Zelon shuck. It's tied using a loop wing low over the back. The X-caddis is the adult caddis fly imitation we just love to fish. It complements the iris caddis beautifully. Catches lots of fish and can be tied in different sizes and colours right down to 22s representing various species of microcaddis. Stonefly nymphs are an important invertebrate food item for New Zealand trout. They come in several different colours and sizes. This one represents a medium-sized brown stonefly. We also tied them in green and black. These patterns are heavily weighted. Dom prefers to tie a more impressionistic version. I like rubber legs, a bit sad like that. The parachute Adams is a world-renowned fly, equally effective in New Zealand as anywhere else. Many upright aquatic insects have a variation on a grey body. A size 14s or 16s Adams is a good general imitation. This one is tied parachute style and has a Zelon shuck attached instead of the traditional hackle fibre tail. Black spider, a good fish catcher on most rivers at the right time. A good imitation of any number of black terrestrial flies. Don caught his 8 1/4 pound fish on this fly. Okay. And finally, the beadhead squirrel is one of my all-time favourite flies and is simplicity itself to tie. Fished correctly, it will hold its own with any other nymph pattern. This one is tied with a small copper beadhead and additional weight may be incorporated if required. Dark olive squirrel tail dubbing ribbed with a fine copper wire completes the fly. I like to tie this nymph on a size 14 hook. On reflection, one of the main reasons the trip was so successful was the thorough planning we undertook well in advance.